Hello, 325s, and welcome to week 6 on global capital flows and risk management. Make First of all, we'll say a few words about exchange rates and global capital flows. I think the book does a good job covering this. A few things I'd like to add, though, is our advisory board to the College of Business and Economics, COBIAC, a few years ago. We asked them what topics all students at Boise State need to understand. And one of them that came up out of maybe 5 or 10 as essential is foreign exchange. And the reason is there's a lot of volatility. So before I even start this, I would like to ask all of you to just on your own do a little case, which I like to give during my in-person classes. Let's say you have $1 billion to invest or not in foreign currency. And so you have to make a decision right now. You have three choices. You can invest $1 billion in Great Britain pounds, which when I checked it was 0.75428 to the dollar. You could invest $1 billion in euros, which is, when I checked it, 0.883642 to the dollar. Or you could invest in Japanese yen, which was 113.0775. That's 0.75428 for the pound, 0.883642 for the euro, and 113.0775 for the yen. Or you could choose to just hold your dollars and see what happens. So we'll come back to this at the end of the lecture. So, as I was saying, there's a great deal of volatility in exchange rates, and various research and estimates show that the S&P 500, which we've talked a little bit about as being representative of 500 iconic and relatively large companies that are doing business in the US, between on average 30 and 50% of their revenue is not coming in is coming from abroad. So in other words, it is volatile to exchange rates. So just think about this for a second. What other thing in a company gives you every second of every day a third to a half of your overall volatility? There's almost nothing. I mean, maybe you have a catastrophe, a natural disaster, maybe your entire workforce quits, maybe some massive thing happens, but there are very few of the operational details that you study in marketing and finance and other courses that could have this kind of massive impact. And even if you're not doing business with companies abroad, it comes through in pricing, which we've already talked about in supply chain, right? So prices become volatile not only due to the way things are being transported, but due to the way that currencies are traded. So I think the book does a good job thinking about this, but you really have to make a decision, right? Do you hedge in the foreign currency or do you hold, right? One strategy, which I don't think the book talks about, but McKinsey likes. I was talking about this with a friend of mine who runs an investment hedge fund out of San Francisco and worked for the Fed and for McKinsey and others. Is called a natural hedge. If you have enough businesses across enough currencies, across enough countries, there is the idea that they all sort of net out, right, to some extent. On the other hand, if most of your business is with China or with the UK or with Saudi Arabia, then you have to be very, very aware of what's happening with those exchange rates. I'll just give you a quick story. At uh, when I was at the state of Missouri Japan office, our budget was in dollars, but we had to pay for everything in yen. And during the 4 years or so I was there, the exchange rate fluctuated between around 80 yen to the dollar to 120 yen to the dollar. So depending on when we got our budget, right, we were some days rich and some days poor, and it had very little to do with our performance. So, that's a 50% gap in our ability, either plus or minus, to do stuff just based on the exchange rate. So many companies have to deal with this kind of environment and all are affected by it because of the global nature of supply chains. And the final point on this is that the currency of last resort is the dollar. So it all comes down to the dollar, which is why another reason why the US has a vested interest in keeping its role. I was having this debate also with my friend yesterday as sort of the global sort of superpower slash lender of last resort, et cetera. Because if it moves out of dollars, we lose our ability to influence these global prices, global trends through decisions made by the Fed, made by the Treasury. And the power will go elsewhere, right? It will leak out of the dollar and into other currencies. And there are, I think now moving into the global financial institutions, which is the other chapter that you guys are reading, we have the IMF and the World Bank at the center of it, right? Of course, the United Nations more on the political front, and all are under political fire and have been increasingly, I think, for years. There's a lot to be said on this. But one thing we do have to keep in mind is that the US wrote the rules for these. We designed them after World War II, which in a way that were ostensibly in the US's best interests. So, and this has been argued many times uh, the, the with the TPF and other treaties that we've backed out of. We wrote the rules, so when it does come to being renegotiated, we're unlikely to be able to rewrite the rules if we sort of dropped our own agreements. And there are some counter schemes that are coming into various amounts of power. The most notable being the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is an initiative, not surprisingly, coming out of Beijing, which many, many, many countries, with the exception of the US, Japan, and the UK, have signed. Most of Europe, which is sort of an alternative to the World Bank and the IMF. It's doing its own funding, its own debt relief, and it's closely tied to the Belt and Road Initiative, which we've talked about in briefly, and many of you have discussed in your current events and in your presentations, and of course was discussed during the China Town Hall. So, in other words, if the U.S. isn't leading the show, somebody is going to try. And most likely, what we'll end up with is a bifurcated or trifurcated or multifurcated world in which there is no single lender. So that's another challenge. The final challenge I would say to this is crypto, right? Which many of you have also written about and is a big wild card, right? I think crypto is a little bit beyond the scope of this course in some ways, and many of you have, and it's great to write about. But it's challenging some of these financial orders. So that's my 10 cents on this week's topic. So, two other things. Please, I sent you out the link this morning to the SPS Virtual Lab. As I said, it's an excellent effort that involves a number of faculty, and I've participated in it many times, and some graduate students who are doing research on various topics. It's a lot of fun. It's very helpful. It's anonymous. It's been vetted by our institutional review board, which all of us have to run any sort of public research through. So we don't end up with a Stanford prison experiment. You can Google that. That was a famously bad experiment that happened in the 70s. Netflix has a good documentary on it. But it's a lot of fun and it won't take you that long. And we'd appreciate you doing it. And you get a point extra credit. And that's due, I think, 9 a.m. Monday. And please do the code so that will kick back to us so we know to give you extra credit. And then finally, your presentations. I'm getting around to grading this week. So of course, I'll have a question for each group. We had a great question, which I sent out another announcement this morning. Right, if you guys are doing a great job of asking specific questions to specific people, and some of you may not get asked a question. And as Alicia said, you know, use that as an opportunity to sum up and see the gaps and always try to keep, even if you disagree with your teammates, try to sound like you're somewhat coherent. That's just general advice in giving presentations. It's best to disagree behind the scenes instead of while you're on the stage. That's just a good advice in life, I think. So now let's get back to the bet, right? what did you decide to do, right? Did you buy pounds, euros, yen, or none? And you can go and Google what the exchange rate is right now and see if you made a fortune or lost a fortune or just sort of stayed the same. And this is essentially I these rates were from about 10 a.m. yesterday morning. They, this is, you can see how much has changed depending on when you watch this video. And just think about that. That's just a very short time, right? If you look, if you go on Yahoo Finance, that's one of the few things I still use Yahoo for. They do good historical charts. You can look at it up to the microsecond, or you can look at it for the historical period, whatever they have, up to 20 years, and you see the volatility over time gets greater and greater. So, see how you did. I hope you made a lot of money, but as you can probably tell, it is essentially um, a casino game, right? So, I think that the book that makes a good point of that. So, have a great week, and I look forward to your work.